Is Kyle Hendricks the best Cubs pitcher in the expansion era?
Right.
I know it sounds crazy. He's never had a 200 inning season. He's never struck out 200 batters. He only won 15 games once in his career, and aside from winning the World Series, he doesn't have any individual accolades that scream ace to you. Now, you might think, yeah, the Kyle Hendricks that we saw in the final game of his Cubs career, now that's a guy that I can get behind. But the Kyle Hendricks that was struggling to get his ERA under 11 for the first part of 2024, ain't no way. But listen, after 11 years with the Cubs, Professor Carl is in almost every top 5 category in the expansion era. So after you see all these stats, let me know where you rank Kyle in your top Cubs pitchers. So if you're like me, I had to Google when the MLB expansion era actually started. The answer, 1961. Ironically, the same year that Roger Maris hit 61 home runs to surpass Babe Ruth as the all-time home run king. That was kind of an dumb moment for me because I remember seeing that in the movie 61, one of my favorite baseball movies. Now, they called this the expansion era because stadiums started serving more hot dogs, so people had to expand their belts more. Oh, that's not the reason. Okay, let me look back at the Google thing. Yes, okay, it was because they added more teams. Okay, there's your history lesson for the day. Now, who are some guys that you might think are better than Kyle in this expansion era? How about Kerry Wood, Carlos Zambrano, Greg Maddux, Rick Russell, Rick Sutcliffe, John Lester, Fergie Jenkins. The list kind of goes on, so it's going to be tough to convince you that Kyle Hendricks is the best pitcher since the expansion era. But good news, that's not what I want to do. I actually want you to see all the facts and you make a decision on who you think is the best Cubs pitcher in the expansion era. I'll let you know who I think it is at the end as well. So let's start with stats that most people care about. Kyle's 5th in wins at 97, games started at 270, and innings pitched at 1,580 and 1/3 innings. He's 6th in ERA at 368. Now that's with a minimum of 1,500 innings pitched. If you adjust that to 1,000 innings pitched, he's at number 9. These are all pretty admirable, right? And if you watch Kyle on his final start as a Cub on that windy day at Wrigley, you probably are thinking to yourself, it makes sense why he's at the top of most of these lists. And if you missed those highlights, don't worry. At the end, I'm going to give you an opportunity to see a detailed breakdown that I did on Kyle Hendricks' last start. But here's where you might get surprised like me. There's a few lists that Kyle showed up on that I didn't expect. How about WAR? According to Baseball Reference, they have him at 22.6, and that ranks 7th among all Cubs pitchers in the expansion era. And even though you don't think of him as a strikeout pitcher, he's 6th in the category with 1,259 strikeouts. Who's ahead of him? Well, all the guys I mentioned before. Greg Maddux, Rick Russell, Wood, Zambrano, Fergie Jenkins coming in at number 1. But here's where it really gets impressive. For Cubs who threw at least 1,000 innings, the Professor is only second to the Professor in strike percentage. That's right, Greg Maddux, the man known for facing over 20,000 batters in his career and only having a 3-0 count 133 of those times, is the only other Cub to throw more strikes at a higher rate than Kyle Hendricks. How much more? Greg Maddux threw only 1% more strikes at 66.6%. That's a terrible number, but Kyle Hendricks at 65.6%. The next closest on that list was John Lester at 62.9% of the time. That's almost a 3% gap between Lester and Hendricks. In fact, from a walks per 9 innings perspective, Kyle as a Cub was better than Maddux. He had a 2.1 walks per 9 ratio where Maddux was at 2.4. Kyle is second on the list, only Fergie Jenkins, who had an even 2.0 walks per 9 innings. And until the later part of his career, Kyle was amazing at keeping runners off base. He's second in WHIP, walks plus hits per innings pitch, only to Fergie Jenkins. And even when runners got on base, Kyle was really good at something that I actually had a hunch he was good at, pickoffs. He has 25, that's second all-time for Cubs, only to Rick Sutcliffe at 27. And of course, we all remember his amazing 2016 season, whether it was Game 7 of the World Series, Game 6 of the NLCS, or his crazy regular season where he flirted with an ERA under 2. Kyle was magical that year. So magical that he's one of only 3 Cubs pitchers in the expansion era to have an ERA under 2.15 while throwing at least 180 innings in one season. Dick Ellsworth did it in 1963, and then of course the stupid video game season that Jake Arrieta had in 2015. And then there's a stat that means the most to me as a Cubs fan, and it should to you too. postseason starts. Kyle leads the way with 11 postseason starts. No other Cub has more postseason starts than Kyle, and to me, there is no other stat that is more important than this one. You cannot convince me otherwise. You also can't convince me that he should have been pulled from the 5th inning of Game 7 in the World Series, but oh well, we still won. Some other notable stats. Kyle is 7th in double plays induced at 110, 6th in OPS allowed at 695 with at least 1,000 innings as the qualifier, and 5th in quality starts with 135. So where do you rank Kyle? Not that it matters, but I don't rank Kyle as number 1. I've got Fergie Jenkins right there. As I went through these lists, Fergie was in the top 1, 2, or 3 of almost every single one of them. For that reason, got to give mad respect to him. Let me know in the comments, and if you didn't see Kyle Hendricks' final start, or if you want to see a detailed breakdown, I did just that. Make sure you click on it. It's in the description.